So, can you see the screen? So, it's, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, I'll start by briefly going through what I had discussed in the last class, and then I'll start today's lecture. Okay. So, as I pointed out, that Keynes was a very strong influence during the 1930s and 40s. But from the 50s onwards, questions were being asked about the Keynesian theory and policies. And around this time, Milton Friedman and the Chicago School led the monetarist counter revolution. Now, what is a monetarist? A monetarist is an economist who believes in certain propositions. He believes, well, he or she believes that the supply of money is a dominant determinant of nominal income. So, supply of money, the money supply determines nominal income, P into Y. In the short run, money also influences real output and employment. But in the long run, money does not determine real variables. They determine only the nominal variables. The private sector is supposed to be a stabilizing force. It is the government policies that creates uncertainties and instability. So unlike Keynes, who argued that it was the instability in private investment demand that created uncertainties and led to the depression, Friedman says that the private sector is the blue-eyed boy. It is the government who is the devil. Now, why monetarism? Why did monetarism emerge? See, Fisher and the Cambridge School had argued that if you look at the at the quantity theory, then if we assume that V is stable over there, and if we assume that in that case, the money supply will determine the value of P into Y. Okay, so nominal in P into Y is nominal income. So therefore, it is the money supply. If money supply increases, nominal income will go up. If money supply comes down, nominal income will come down. I'm just giving, if I give an example, sorry, I forgot to take the pen. Suppose the value of V is suppose 2. In that case, if your money supply is 200, then M into V is 200 into 2, 400. So the nominal income will be, if the money supply changes to, let us say, 300, then nominal income will increase to 600. 300 into 2.
So, are you writing something?
No, I haven't written something. I've
Okay.
just prepared my pen. Okay, so what I'm saying is that let V is equal to 2. So if M is equal to 200, then Py, which is nominal income, will be 400. If M is 300, then nominal income becomes 600. So there are two things. Firstly, nominal income is determined by M. Secondly, if nominal income changes, it can change only if M changes. There are no other sources of changes in nominal income. Now, as you know, the classical economists had argued, apart from this quantity theory, that the economy was self-adjusting. So if there were any shocks, then this would automatically be taken care of by changes in the nominal values. The real value will be generally constant. But the experience during depression and starting from the 1929 onwards, the experience showed that you can have a very massive shock, and this can lead to changes in both real and nominal variables. So Keynes argued that this was due to a deficit of spending, a deficit of demand. Now Friedman argued that the Keynesian view was wrong. The classical framework can be used to interpret the events of depression. If you asked Pigou, Marshall, or the other classicals, they might not have been able to explain how depression occurred, but Friedman said that if you use the framework, we can show why depression had occurred. Okay. Now, in order to do this, you have to look at the classical framework in a slightly different manner. Particularly, the quantity theory of money has to be reframed. So that means the role of money becomes important in the monetarist counter-revolution. In the Keynesian model, money was an important determinant of economic activity, but this is crucial. The velocity of money was endogenous. It was neither exogenously determined nor was it a constant. It was a variable which is determined by the functioning of the economic system. So now if you go back to the quantity theory, both M and V are are variables. So that means if there's a change in M, this can lead to a change in nominal income, what was argued by the Cambridge School. But a change in the velocity of money could also lead to a change in nominal income. So both of them, or any of them, or both of them can lead to a change in nominal income. So therefore, the question is, what are the factors that are determining the velocity of money? Now look at this ISLM framework. Over here we have the IS curve drawn for a particular level of government spending, G0. So the equilibrium occurs at R0 and the income level is Y0. This is the real income level. Okay. Then there's an increase in government spending, which is financed by the sale of bonds. So what happens? The IS curve will shift outwards. Initially, income increases up till this point. Okay. So we have equilibrium in the commodity market. Demand increases, the supply of output also increases to this level. So commodity market returns to equilibrium. But we are off the LM curve, so that means the money market is not in equilibrium. Okay, over here we see that because Y has gone up, the transaction demand is going to rise, KPY. MD is equal to KPY plus LR. So the transactions demand will increase. Given that money supply is constant, we now have excess demand in the money market. Now, meanwhile, the government has covered the deficit by selling bonds. So the supply of bonds has gone up, the price of bonds will fall, and the rate of interest will rise. So if R rises, the speculative demand for money, LR, that is going to fall. So the speculative demand for money falls and we have equilibrium in the money market also. So what happens is we move up like this. The initial movement is like this. Now R increases and we come over here. Now in this position, what happens is, I mean, you know the remaining part because rate of interest has gone up. The loanable funds becomes more costly. Investment becomes more costly. So private investment is going to decrease. We have a crowding out of private investment by government spending. Okay, and this leads to a return to income from here to here. So this is the final income. Now, the point that I want to make is that if you compare the initial equilibrium income, Y0, and the final income, Y1, we can see that income has increased. Now, if you go back to the quantity theory, the Cambridge version, it was argued, Marshall and Pigou argued that any change in nominal income is possible only if money changes. So this is an if and only if condition. Only if there's a change in money supply, you have a new income level. But over here, what we have seen is there's no change in money supply. MS is constant. MD increased and then it decreased. So there's no change in money supply. Without a change in money supply, you have a higher level of nominal income and real income. The reason is that V is now a variable in the Keynesian case. So the one-to-one relation between money and nominal income does not exist in the Keynesian model. If you want to undertake transactions of let us say the nominal income was 1,000 and it has increased to 1,500. Okay. Your money supply has not gone up, it is still 500. Then how can we cover this? The velocity of money has increased. Money changes hands more frequently. You still have, let us say, 2,500 rupees, but now instead of changing hands 4 times, it changes hands 6 times. Is this part clear? Yeah, someone please tell me because I can't see. I can see only my PPT screen. The
Yes.
Meet screen is not visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, so what we have seen is that income can go up even if money supply is constant. Now, let us look at the second part. If there's a change in income, what happens? Pigou and Marshall would have said that income will increase. But look at what happens over here. During the depression, a stock market bubble had led to the economy going into the liquidity trap. That means the LM curve is flat. It is highly interest sensitive. Okay. On the other hand, the IS curve is steep. So that means if there's a change in interest, investment is not going to go up or decrease. Okay, you have excess capacity, low demand. So a change in interest rate will not have a major effect on investments. In this situation, if you introduce a change in money supply, we move from LM0 to LM1. So you can see over here using the diagram that income does increase, but it increases to a very marginal extent. So money is not the primary moving factor underlying income changes. So the two arguments that we have placed over here in this Cambridge school, M determines Py, and the only change in Py can change only through changes in N. Both these propositions were demolished by the experiences of depression. So Keynes argued that money is not important. Yes, please. Did someone want to say anything?
Yes, so could you explain what is stock market bubble?
Stock market bubble. Okay, basically, see, bubble is, you know what a bubble is. I'm sure that you have blown bubbles.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So bubbles are very nice, but what is the problem with bubbles? They burst.
Yes, sir.
They grow, they become big, and then they burst. So what happens is the stock market grows, but the growth is not based on fundamental values. By growing stock market, I mean that the share prices increases. Now, share prices can increase, or it should increase, if the economy is growing, if the confidence level is high, and so on. In some cases, if there's speculation, particularly, then you will see that the stock market can grow, the prices will rise, but you will see that there are some stocks, companies whose stocks are worthless. They don't even have money. They don't have land. They don't even have an office. Or maybe it's an office, small one-room office. But the share prices goes up to 10,000, 50,000, 60,000. It just booms, flows up. And people start buying them like mad. Okay. So this is called a stock market bubble. The growth is not based on fundamental values. The companies whose prices are going up do not or should not really have any value. So ultimately a time comes when people prices goes up so high that no one wants to buy, and then everything unravels. It just falls. It falls not in weeks, not in days, but in hours, minutes. In minutes, your entire wealth is wiped out. And then this leads to contagion, panic.
Sir, has there been such incidents in history? Like where the companies are just a facade, but the market stock prices are just booming up?
I mean, there has been in numerous such cases. How many do you want?
Sir, one solid case so that I can read up on it.
Great Depression,
Yes,
1929.
yes, that I know. That
Okay,
will definitely be a
19,
reading.
1997, Southeast Asian collapse. 2007-8, the global financial meltdown. We are still in it.
Sir, Y2K, sir, the software bubble in 2000.
Sorry, what? Beg your pardon?
Sir, Y2K, sir, the software shares increased in the year 2000.
Okay, but that to some extent, it was a temporary increase. But the reason was something like over here that during in last year, for instance, when the different companies, pharmaceutical companies, their share prices were increasing. And the reason was that people were expecting that these companies would get the vaccines. And that is the reason why their share prices goes up. So there's a reason or logic behind the share increase. In Y2K also, it was the same reason. You require a lot of resources from the IT sector, so the IT sector share prices increased. It may be a temporary change, but at least there's some logic. But I mean, global meltdown, etc. And people, I mean, the assets did not have any value at all. I mean, like suppose or some of you get together and just mm, your office is the landing in front of the economist department, and you just announce a company, Econ Pressy. You'll see the share prices are going up. You're not producing anything. You're not even trading. But for some reason, people suddenly, the prices are going up. So people expect that, okay, if I buy, prices will increase still further and I'm going to make a profit. And what happens is a chain effect. The more prices increase, the more you feel that if I buy now, prices will again increase, I'll make a profit. Your belief is reinforced. So, did you get the idea? Okay. So, anyway, so what we got, the depression showed that money was unimportant in the Keynesian model. Okay. After the depression, what happened was uh, the US government financed expenditure by selling bonds at a low interest rate. Now, see, one reason that why we are focusing so much on uh, events in US and UK is that most the Keynesian policy basically developed, or the developments in the macro policies occurred in response to crises in these countries. Before 47, India did not have a independent economic policy. Afterwards, also, Indian economists did not build up a theory which is similar to, let us say, the monetarist or Keynesian or whatever, based on the Indian experiences. So that is the reason why we are giving so many examples from the US economy. That really was, you can say, that is the experimental hunting ground for economists, for macroeconomists. Anyway, during World War II, the US government had to increase spending in order to finance the war efforts. A huge expenditure was on defense. And they covered this expenditure by selling bonds at a very low interest rate. The interest rate was low so that investment demand could be high. People could buy the firms could, I mean, if the overall interest rate was low, firms could borrow and then this would push up the investment demand. So the policymakers felt that, okay, if the interest rate, a low interest rate, can play such an important role in pushing up demand, then we should deliberately try to ensure that interest rates remain low. Technically, they call this pegging the interest rate. You know what a peg is? It's a very large nail which you hammer onto the ground. So the interest rate was pegged to low rates. Okay. Please give me 2 minutes. I'll come immediately. Okay, sorry. Okay. So the perception that low interest rate will will ensure that demand is high led to a policy of targeting interest rate. Interest rates were pegged to low rates. Now this had another advantage. If you have low interest rate, then price of bonds will be high and the capital value of bonds will also be protected. Okay, if prices of bonds remain high, you don't lose by buying bonds. So this will ensure that there's stability of financial markets. Otherwise, the what would have happened is if interest rates fluctuate, bond prices will also fluctuate, and people will, depending on whether bond price is high or low, people will all the people will start buying bonds, or all the people will start selling bonds. You will have waves, instability in the financial market. When bond prices rise, everyone will start buying bonds. When bond prices start falling, everyone will start selling bonds. So you're going to have instability, which can be eliminated if you peg interest rate. Okay, so if you have the problem with pegging interest rate is that you lose the control over money supply. Okay. See, you can do two things in the money market. You can either control money supply and allow interest rate to adjust, or you can fix the money supply and allow the you can either fix the interest rate and allow money supply to change. Okay. Let me use this part. See, in the LM market, what happens is, this is the LM curve. What you can do is you can say that, okay, this is my target rate of interest. Okay. So suppose the IS curve moves over here. You can do two things. You can say that, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the interest rate in this manner at this level. So you can increase the money supply and shift the LM curve to over here. The point is that you don't have a choice. You have to increase money supply, and the amount that you increase, sorry. Sorry, what I was saying is that if you want to peg your interest rate, you have to increase your money supply. That is one. You don't have a choice. Exactly how much you have to increase your money supply, that also is given to you. Okay, you need to increase your money supply so that the LM curve is this one. So there's a complete loss in the over money supply in the market. Now, is it important? The Keynesians would argue that no, it is not important. The reason why it is not important is that, as you have seen, the quantity of money is not an important determinant of income. You've seen over here that a change in money supply does not really affect the interest rate, given that the economy was in this portion. So, okay, your interest rate is low. This has advantages. The disadvantage, you lose control over money supply, is a cost which is acceptable. Okay. So this was the background or context in which Friedman started his restatement of quantity theory. His first point was Keynes was wrong. The demand for money was stable. V was constant. The velocity of money is constant. Second, he argued that the LM curve is not horizontal. It is a vertical curve. Okay. The interest elasticity of money was not infinite, but it was very low. So that means the LM curve, if you look at the LM curve like this, Keynes would say this is the LM curve. Friedman says no, this is the relevant part of the LM curve. Friedman uses the Cambridge version, MD is equal to KPY. Given a constant K, remember, velocity of money V is equal to 1 by K. So given a constant K or V, whatever you want, and given the fact that money supply is set by monetary authorities, it becomes a theory of by which we can determine nominal income. So the starting point of the Cambridge or Friedman's quantity theory is MD is equal to KPY. Given the values of given K constant, the values of P and Y will determine what is the money demand function. Okay. Now, if the central bank sets the money supply, so we have MD equal to MS. Now this is at equilibrium. Okay. So we have KPY equal to MS. Now, given that K is constant and money supply is set by the government, what you can do is you can change your money supply so that P and Y can change. If you want a high nominal income, you simply increase money supply. If you feel that the economy is getting overheated, you reduce money supply and nominal income will fall. So is this clear to everyone? That why the quantity theory is a demand for money, how can it be converted to a model of income?
So could you repeat the last portion that you explained?
Okay. You mean this part? This part, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
See, the quantity theory is this. Okay. When PY is nominal income. Okay. Now, if you have this equation and you know the value of the nominal income, do you know what is the demand for money?
So it's MD equal to KPY.
Yeah, suppose, let me give an example. Suppose K is 2. Okay. Let us say small y is the nominal income. Let us say y is nominal income is 150. How much money do we require?
So 2 into 150.
Sorry, actually it's wrong. It is v which is 2. So k is half.
Yes, sir. So 75.
Yeah. So we require 75. Acha. Suppose nominal income is 250. What is the demand for money? Same conditions,
125.
125. So this means that if your k is constant, k or v, whatever is constant, if you know what is nominal income, you can find out what is your corresponding demand for money function. Right? Is this part clear?
Yes, sir.
This is a theory of money demand. Acha. Now we come to this part. It's a model of determining y. See, in the money market, we have MD equal to MS at equilibrium. Right? Okay. Now, this is equal to K into PY. Right? And this is the money supply, which is exogenous. Right? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now we are still assuming that K is half. Okay. So let us say that your money supply is 200. What is your nominal income? Can we find out what is nominal income, PY?
Sir, we have to equate MD equal to MS.
Yeah, this we are saying MD equal to MS, right? In equilibrium. So in case of MD, we are putting in MS. Sorry, KPY.
Yes, sir. So
So it's KPY into M equal to MS. Yeah.
if we know the value of K and MS, then we can find PY.
We know what is PY. So if K is half, MS is 200, we can find out what is nominal income.
Yes, it's 400.
Yeah. So if the money market is in equilibrium, then, and remember K has to be constant. So in that case, given the money supply, we can find out what is the level of nominal income in the economy, so that the money market is in equilibrium, right? So given MS, we can find out what is PY, so that the money market is in equilibrium, right? That is why Friedman said that it can be converted to a theory or model, or if you want a formula for determining nominal income.
Okay, sir.
Sure that it's clear? Or
Yes,
should
sir.
I repeat the last part? Determination of nominal income.
No, sir. It's clear.
Okay. 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 Now the classicals had argued that money was a medium of exchange. To Marshall and Pigou, the sole function of money was it facilitated transactions. Barter cannot work, so money has to be brought in so that you can exchange commodities. That is why they are focusing on transactions demand. The only demand for money is for transactions. Keynes, however, argued that money has an additional function. It is an asset. Okay. So at any point of time, money has certain advantages. What is the advantage of money as an asset? Can anyone say, please?
Sir, liquidity.
And what is the
It does
disadvantage?
not pay interest.
No returns.
No,
it does not pay any interest rate. So on one hand, you have an asset which is liquid, but it doesn't pay any interest rate. On the other hand, we have certain assets which are all combined and clubbed together and called bonds. Not so liquid, but it gives you a return. Keynes said that the individual tries to allocate his wealth between money and bonds. And this part generates the speculative demand component, the L as a function of R. Okay. So this part is the classical form, and this part is Keynes's innovation. So the classical said only this component should be taken. Keynes said you should take in both the components. Friedman starts by accepting the Keynesian view of money as an asset.
Excuse me, sir. Sir, in the previous slide, you said that K is constant. Sir, here we have written that K is a function of R.
Yeah,
In
this is Friedman's argument. Okay. Now we are coming to, so this part is Keynes, and now we are going to show how Friedman departs from Keynes. Okay, so this part is still Keynes. This is classical. Cambridge, Marshall and Pigou. Okay. That is why K is constant. Keynes argued that given this choice, V cannot be supposed to be a constant. V becomes a variable which is determined by rate of interest. Okay. Now what happens if V is a variable? Right? Let us say the money supply is 200. Now can you tell me what is the nominal income?
It would depend
No,
on
sir,
the
as V is variable.
You have to know what is V. If V is a variable, there's no direct relation. You can't say that, okay, this is going to be nominal income. Okay. So Keynes showed that this equation, the quantity theory, cannot be a theory of determining income. It can be a theory of determining the money demand, but only partially. But once you incorporate this part, the quantity theory cannot be used to determine income. Friedman accepted Keynes's logic that money is not just a medium of exchange. Money also plays a role as an asset. But he said that you have different types of assets, not just one homogeneous category. You have bonds, you have equities, you have durable commodities. Now, durable commodities is cars, AC machines, fridges, TV. They do not give an explicit return. But what happens is their prices may go up. So suppose you buy a TV today and tomorrow you find that the price of TV has gone up by 100 rupees. That means you have saved this 100 rupees. Okay, the value of your asset is now increased. It has gone up by 100. Okay. This is what we call the nominal interest rate on durable goods. The change in prices. In case of equities and bond, it is easy. They give you a return. Now, suppose the rate of return, any of them, RB, RE, RD, suppose it goes up. In that case, you will shift your wealth from cash, from money to these assets. If the bond rate goes up, you will shift from money to bonds. If equities goes up, you shift from money to equities. RD goes up, you start buying durable commodities. Okay? Because you feel that, okay, the prices will go up even further. So the Keynesian theory and Friedman theory was different in this sense. Friedman argued that the money demand was stable. Keynes said, no, it was not stable, it's unstable. He does not segregate the demand function into components. So it is not KPY plus LR. It is just one part. The KPY, the transaction part, is subsumed into the L part. Keynes, however, divides demand function into a transaction part and a precautionary part. This is the KPY part. And then plus LR, the speculative part. Okay. So Friedman says that you cannot club together all the assets. You should separate them and keep all their rates of return separate. Keynes, however, clubs them all together and calls them bonds. So in that case, the Cambridge equation can be restated as K as a function of rates of interest into PY. So this is no longer a variable. Okay. Increase in returns to any asset. Okay, any of the R goes up, the asset would become more desirable. So if bonds goes up, people want to buy bonds. And this is going to lead to a reduction in K. Do you understand why K reduces?
So will you explain that again?
Okay. হ্যাঁ দাঁড়া আমার পেনটা আমি ঠিক করতে পারছি না
Sir, can you explain why it is stable?
Yeah,
and
I'm showing it. I'm a pen. I couldn't adjust my pen. That's why I've taken time. Suppose bond rate increases. Just think intuitively. You're not an economist. Your wealth is in the form of bonds and cash. If your return to bonds increases, what will you do? What will happen to this allocation?
Buy more bonds.
You'll reduce cash and transfer this into bonds. Okay? Your money demand reduces, in other words. Okay, so the stock of money in the economy, the amount of money that people want to hold decreases. Okay, ebar dharo, suppose there has not been any change so far. So what is the value of transaction? The value of transaction is PY. Right? This is unchanged in the immediate period. Achha. This has gone down, right? So in order to ensure this equality, what should happen to V?
It should rise.
It should rise. Now if V rises, what should
K
happen
must
to?
fall.
This means 1 by K is falling. So K must fall. Okay, so this is the mechanism.
Sir, why stock of money fell? So it is exogenous.
No, people are not holding money.
Sir, it is money supplied.
No, what is happening is you have a money supply. ঠিক আছে, money supply টা তো হচ্ছে. So let us say that you are the central authority. You have issued 1000 rupees currency. But what happens is we are no longer holding using that 1000 rupees currency. We are using a much lower amount. What has happened is we have bought 200 rupees as bonds. So this has gone to the bond market. We now have only 800 rupees with us. 800 rupees with which we can undertake transactions. Okay. Okay. So Friedman argued that unlike the Cambridge school where K was a constant, K can be a variable. Okay, so MS equal to MD. MD is equal to K, which is variable, into nominal income. But if money demand is stable, okay, this is the crucial assumption made by Friedman. If money demand is stable, what will happen? Okay, so in this case, if there's an increase in money supply, in order to ensure that you have equilibrium, money demand too has to rise. So there will be a fall in R. K will rise. So this is the opposite of what is happening over here. And because of this change in rate of interest, your PY will be affected in the short run. So Friedman argues that a monetary policy is important. Okay. No, sorry, this is not still. This is still the Keynesian case. The new Keynesians are now arguing they have accepted the fact that monetary policy is important. Okay, so the earlier Keynesian said that monetary policy is unimportant, it doesn't affect income. So the modern Keynesian theory accepts that monetary policy can be important. They still argue that you have innovations in the financial sector which have destabilized the money demand function. Can you tell me what are the possible innovations? Just name one.
Plastic money.
Plastic money. Online transactions. Credit card, debit card. So previously, if you had to go and buy something, you had to go to the bank, take the money and go and buy. But now, you can just go and take give your debit card or credit card or transfer money online, Google Pay, whatever. You know the things better than me. So transactions now, the money demand function now becomes much more unstable. You need no, at any point of time, maybe you go to the ATM and withdraw money. Given the same conditions, the simple fact that the ATM is not there, you use plastic money. The demand for money can be anything given the same conditions. Further, there was a rush for liquidity around 2007-8. I mean, because of the global meltdown, in 2007-8, people felt that the banks and financial institutions were not reliable. So instead of keeping the money in these institutions and losing them, it's better if we keep the money with us. So that means the money demand function is unstable, one. And secondly, the interest elasticity of demand for money is much higher than what Friedman says. So the main uh, crux was what happens to LR? Is it high or is it low? The Keynesians are saying it's high. Friedman is saying it is low. If it is high, this will be the LM curve. If it is low, this will be the LM curve. हाँ एक तो टाइम लगेगा अच्छा okay so this is the only difference. Okay, what is the slope of the LM curve? This so far what I've said is only which portion of the ISLM curve we are. Now let us come to the main differences. See, the classicals had directly said that K is constant. Friedman says that K is a function of RE, RB, and RD, but the interest elasticity is very low. So if these changes, K will change, but the change in K is marginal. You can approximate this by saying that del K is 0, which implies K is almost a constant. This almost is important because the quantity theory, this part 1 by Km, is only an approximation as K is not completely constant. It changes very slightly. But this approximation is better than the Keynesian theory of money demand, which tries to bring in a lot of factors, introduces a lot of complexities, but at the final say it misses the main points.
Sir, could you show the previous slide once?
This one. Okay, just one.
Sir, done.
I think you want this slide also, Upanita?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the difference between Friedman's restatement is that K is not completely a variable, it is a function of certain variables, the rates of interest, but because they don't have a major impact, K becomes virtually a constant. Okay, may I shift now?
Yes, I'm writing the last line. Sir, done. Thank you so much.
Okay. So that means, see, we had done some ISLM model over here, right? Now let's do the analysis again, but in Friedman's terms. The LM curve will be vertical, not horizontal. It is the IS curve which is horizontal. Okay, it's interest sensitive. The reason is that Keynes just looked at rate of interest as a cost of loanable funds. If interest goes up, your funds become, it's more difficult for firms to borrow. Friedman argued that assets are not homogeneous, so you have the interest rates will operate through multiple channels. That is why investment will become highly interest sensitive. Let us suppose that an increase in money supply occurs. The money supply will shift rightwards. And as you can see, that contrary to what the earlier Keynesians believe, you now have an increase in money supply. Right? So for the same price level, your money supply is going up and the aggregate demand curve is shifting outwards. So this leads to both rising prices and rising income. So in other words, money is important. Money does affect the real variables in the short run. The difference between the modern Keynesians and the monetarists is regarding their policy. How to use money supply to stabilize income. Okay. Basically, there are two types of rules. The modern Keynesians argues that you should go for discretion. Very simply, you should go for counter-cyclical policies. The monetarists, on the other hand, said that you should just introduce a fixed rule. Money supply will be this, 4% growth. This will rule out uncertainties. The private sector is inherently stable. Once you follow a fixed rule, the government sector also becomes, or policy also becomes, certain and not a destabilizing agency. So this can ensure faster and more stable growth. Okay, so in the next class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss the specific this debate between. Sorry, where is it? This rules versus discretionary policy. Okay, look at the different implications for monetary policy, fiscal policy, and this will close our discussion of the monetarist counter revolution. Then we'll go to rational expectations. Okay, so what I've discussed so far, I've taught from Freund. The next part I'm going to discuss from Mankiw.
So this is Freud chapter 9.